The federal courthouse in Manhattan, normally home to financial lawsuits and intellectual property disputes, had on this morning become the hottest location in America. The air in courtroom 4B was thick, as if the oxygen had been sucked out entirely. The scent of stale coffee and ballpoint ink mixed with a lingering anxiety that clung to the press benches like a second skin. A CNN reporter stopped taking notes. An Associated Press correspondent stared blankly at their audio recorder. Even the seasoned attorneys, those long inoculated to courtroom drama, began exchanging glances, not out of surprise, but disbelief at what they were witnessing. In the center of this tightening atmosphere, Sean Diddy Combs, producer billionaire, the mogul behind Bad Boy Records Revolt TV, and some of the most culturally powerful black brands in America, fell to his knees, not from exhaustion, not as part of some legal maneuver, but because there was nowhere else to go. "Please just let me say this one last time. I have nothing left to hide. But don't let this destroy my family." His voice was hoarse, devoid of composure, confidence, or the polish that graced him on the BET Awards stage or in the pages of Vogue. The trademark sunglasses had been off since the start of the session. His eyes were sunken. His hands were clasped tightly, trembling in full view. A minute earlier, no one thought he would break. A minute later, no one doubted this breakdown was real. And the epicenter of this public collapse wasn't a witness. It wasn't a tape. It was a document, 437 pages thick, stamped, seal by order, 2015. Filed by one Pam Bondee, a name previously anonymous now revealed to be the linchpin of Combs Global's internal machinery for nearly a decade. She had once served as chief accountant, then in-house legal counsel, eventually tasked with handling matters that should not appear on record. For years, she was known only as the fixer behind the scenes, never quoted, never photographed, and above all, never disloyal. Until this morning. When Judge Harrison Trent called her name to confirm her identity, she walked to the stand in a gray suit, carrying a worn leather briefcase. Without needing to be prompted, she retrieved a moisture-sealed file from within and handed it directly to the prosecutor and the judge. Inside, according to her statement, and later confirmed by an FBI liaison, were the following A-list of 118 private guest identifiers, coded names, roles, and access clearance levels for after-hours private sessions hosted by Combs from 2011-2019. Internal memos between senior assistants regarding data deletion protocols and camera clip metadata manipulation. A handwritten proposal signed by Diddy himself titled Private Risk Index, Tiered Guest System. The title alone drew a hush over the courtroom. But what followed was the real detonation. According to Bondee's sworn statement, the tiered guest system was a ranking structure for backstage party invitees based on 3 factors: fame, trustworthiness, and likelihood of breaking protocol. Guests were categorized as follows. Tier 1. Celebrities and confidentiality-compliant figures, singers, journalists, directors, even political figures, granted the right to leave anytime, image protection insured, often compensated via loyalty fees. Tier 2. Industry staff, dancers, stylists, backstage personnel, granted limited access required to sign non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, twice the standard length. Tier 3. Guests invited via third parties with unknown trust levels, closely monitored, restricted in private conversations, rarely invited back. Tier X. High-risk individuals, those with past disputes, potential lawsuits, or a history of resistance, not to be invited. If present, immediately alert situation control team. And most shocking of all, the names on the Tier 1 list. At least 7 of them had publicly defended Diddy in 2023 across major media outlets. As the federal prosecutor read out the summary, not a single person in the courtroom spoke. Pam Bondee did not cry. But when asked why she remained silent for 9 years, she answered, "Because I believed I was part of a system. I thought I was protecting a company. Until I realized I was protecting something my conscience could no longer support. Diddy's legal team immediately moved to postpone proceedings, citing new developments not accounted for. Judge Trent refused. Mr. Combs has had 9 years to prepare for this. The law does not wait for your emotions, and that's when Diddy stood, walked heavily to the center of the courtroom, and knelt. I know what I've done. I know I let things go too far, but please don't drag my children into this. No one moved. No one spoke. But everything was being recorded by eyes, by mics, by history. By the end of the morning session, the court spokesperson issued a single statement. The materials have been admitted into official record. Court will reconvene at 2:00 p.m. But as reporters exited the building, they didn't fight for interviews like they usually did. They weren't debating right or wrong, because the more urgent question was now, if this is just the tip of the iceberg, how much more is still buried? And in courtroom 4B, as Sean Diddy Combs knelt to beg for mercy, a woman standing silently behind the gallery, unblinking, had just pulled back the curtain on nearly 2 decades of unchecked power in American entertainment. Her name was Pamela Bondee. To the press, Pamela Bondee was a complete unknown. No public Instagram, no mentions in power players of Hollywood lists. No scandals, no leaked footage. But to those who had worked inside the engine room of Combs Global, from finance and HR to media and logistics, Pam Bondee was the one person you never wanted to cross, because she wasn't the one who caused the earthquake. She was the one who quietly recorded every tremor, waiting for the moment to pull out the map. Pam Bondee was born in 1975. She graduated with a degree in accounting from Howard University, the same alma mater as Diddy, though nearly a generation apart. She began her career at Ernst & Young, then moved into internal audit for Warner Music Group. In 2011, she was recruited to Combs Enterprises, just as the company was restructuring its legal and operations systems following leaked internal harassment complaints from as far back as 2008. Initially, her title was simple head of internal audit, but within 18 months, Diddy personally promoted her to chief compliance officer. According to company records, her responsibilities included handling and assessing internal complaints, managing legal risks involving personnel, drafting NDAs for participants in private events, building information control systems for sensitive materials, especially video, audio, and digital documentation. In other words, she was the one in charge of cleaning up, in the most literal, reputational, and legal sense, any mess that might endanger the Combs empire. In a 19-page statement submitted to the court, Pam admitted that she naively believed her job was to protect the brand from false accusations. But by 2013, she began noticing what she called activities that defied classification. One of the first red flags was a file labeled Incident 209B, an internal log about a female event staffer being asked to stay after the party to help clean the VIP floor. Within 48 hours, the woman resigned and signed an 11-page NDA. The amount of her settlement was not listed. When Pam inquired, a senior advisor to Diddy reportedly told her, "Don't touch it." She was handled under Tier 2 protocol. At the time, Pam didn't know what Tier 2 meant. But months later, when she was assigned to revise the guest and internal employee classification system, she uncovered the Private Risk Index, a detailed matrix categorizing individuals by risk level, required control, and recommended handling. From that moment, she began backing up critical documents to a separately encrypted hard drive stored in a bank vault in Brooklyn. Pam admits for 6 years she said nothing. "I was scared. I didn't know who I could trust. Some who tried to speak up never worked in the industry again. One had an accident. Another vanished from LinkedIn overnight. In 2015, a post-production staffer named RL emailed Pam saying he had accidentally recorded something during an event at the London NYC hotel. Something strange. 3 months later, RL was found dead from a fall down the stairs at his home. Police ruled it accidental. Case closed in 6 days. Pam wrote, "I can't say for certain that his death was related, But I can say everyone around me knew exactly what they were sitting on, and they'd do anything to keep it buried. In 2021, Pam left Combs Global following an internal dispute over the firing of a female employee. She joined a tech startup as a compliance consultant and stayed away from the entertainment industry for 2 years. But in November 2023, as Diddy faced a string of civil lawsuits over abuse and harassment, she knew that was not the crack. That was the leak from a dam I helped build. She began reassembling her records, checking statute limitations and NDA clauses, many of which she had written herself. She found that several had expired due to lapse in behavioral oversight clauses. I realized, if I don't speak up now, I'm not a keeper of records. I'm an accomplice. When Pam walked into court on June 6, 2025, she came alone. No lawyer, no handlers, just a woman carrying a sealed briefcase and a voice that did not tremble. "I'm not here to destroy Mr. Combs," she told the court. "I'm here to dismantle a system that has hurt the voiceless for too long, protected by fame and money." When asked if she feared the consequences, she replied, "I've lived with fear for 9 years. Today, I choose truth." In a brief interview with CNN after the session, she refused to answer any questions about Diddy. Instead, she left one sentence that sent chills. "I used to think silence was neutral. Now I know silence always protects the powerful." And with 437 pages now entered into official record, that silence had just ended. From the very first pages, the 437-page dossier submitted by Pam Bondee didn't read like a personal accusation. It wasn't just about Diddy. It wasn't merely an exposé of misconduct. It was a blueprint, a detailed architecture of a system where power, money, and silence operated with the precision of a Swiss watch. One federal prosecutor described it bluntly. "This isn't an investigation report. This is internal evidence." It wasn't written for public consumption, and that's what makes it terrifyingly honest. At the center of the file was a 19-page handwritten document titled Private Risk Index, Tiered Guest System, signed at the bottom by S.C. Sean Combs. The document laid out a ranking system for guests and staff attending after-hours private sessions, events, retreats, and parties held at 5-star hotels, private villas, or international yachts. Each individual was assigned an internal ID code, e.g., KNY 203, VXLN.04, and sorted into 4 tiers based on 3 criteria: public visibility, media influence, and potential for scandal if they spoke out. Behavioral compliance, cooperation level, and prior conduct at events. Legal risk, whether they signed NDAs, history of litigation. Tier 1, high-profile public figures, celebrities, influencers, journalists, even politicians. Entitled to VIP treatment, private rooms, chauffeur service, and loyalty fees. Noted. At least 14. Tier 1 names had publicly defended Diddy between 2020 and 2023. Tier 2. Industry personnel, dancers, stylists, audio technicians, personal assistants, admitted for event support or ambiance creation. Phones confiscated, movement restricted, high-tier NDAs signed. Noted. Several Tier 2 individuals had filed civil suits starting in 2022. Tier 3. Third-party guests. Brought in via other attendees, risk levels unknown. Required 1. Monitoring by internal staff. Non-compliance resulted in blacklisting after a single incident. Tier X. High-risk individuals. Those who had resisted, refused, or threatened to disrupt the system. Strictly prohibited. Any appearance required immediate alert to legal team and event shutdown within 15 minutes. The dossier also included 27 internal SOPs, standard operating procedures, some chillingly detailed. Among them, Protocol 11 p.m. mute. All recording devices disabled after 11:00 p.m. except for pre-cleared technicians. Note G. Kaplan listed repeatedly as technician in charge, matching testimony from former tech staffer George Kaplan. Guideline. Entry slip B. Instructions for collecting phones, smartwatches, hidden cameras before guest entry. Checklist egress silence. Suggested closing phrases to use post-event to ensure guests felt their participation was voluntary. Please understand this was exclusive. We appreciate your discretion. We're so glad you enjoyed. Hope to see you again soon. There's a thank you gift in the car. These lines repeated like scripts weren't about hospitality. They were psychological silencers. At least 6 email threads revealed connections between Combs's system and individuals outside the music industry, including a former journalist at Vibe magazine, listed as PR Neutralizer Tier 1. Translation: someone who could kill a story if needed. A political campaign strategist from the East Coast invited to a private mixer and later wrote a public endorsement at a Revolt TV charity gala. A managing partner at a D.C. law firm paid over $280,000 per invoice to assess litigation risk from Tier 2 and 3 witnesses between 2014 to 2018. While full names were redacted, the email, metadata, financial transfers, and attached memos gave prosecutors enough ammunition to call for expanding the investigation into organized information suppression. One chilling section was titled Emergency Playbook, Reputation Containment Strategy. It outlined a crisis response plan in case a Tier 2 or 3 individual went public. Key components: media holding statement. We are cooperating fully. We believe in due process. Reverse litigation threats. File countersuits for extortion or NDA violation. Media influence strategy. A list of 3 PR firms capable of shaping public perception, including one agency with ties to senior political figures. In a handwritten margin, Diddy allegedly scribbled, "They think one girl can take this down. Wait till they see who's on our side." At the back of the dossier were 40 financial records totaling $8.4 million, all wired from a shell company named Aurora Black LLC, registered in the Bahamas with no clear business activity. Each invoice had cryptic memos, event coordination bonus, consulting for discretion campaign, thank you payout per October agreement. Some recipients had previously filed accusations tied to private sessions, then abruptly withdrew or declined to testify. One payment of $650,000 was issued just 2 weeks before a woman identified as C dropped her 2018 lawsuit and left the U.S. When the court clerk officially admitted the documents into record, federal prosecutor Emily Johnson stood and said, "We are not just looking at misconduct. We are holding a map of a machine. And when a system is built to silence, then anyone who dares speak becomes the most credible witness of all." Just minutes after the court confirmed the dossier's validity, the room froze. Judge Harrison Trent had barely lowered the gavel when Sean Diddy Combs rose unexpectedly. No one stopped him. No one knew what was coming, but instead of exiting the courtroom, he turned toward the jury. And then without cue, without fanfare, he knelt, not like a man praying, not like a man performing, but like someone who had always stood above the rest and had finally come undone. Let me say it just once more. In a broken voice, almost whispering to himself, please hear me this one last time. I have nothing left to hide, but please don't let this destroy my family. Immediately after the unscripted Neil courtroom microphones captured a barely audible voice. Sean Diddy Combs, once a symbol of control, luxury, and swagger, now crouched before the jury, his hands, trembling eyes, hollow glasses gone. Please hear me this one last time. I have nothing left to hide, but please don't let this destroy my family. His lawyers, 3 of them, looked stunned. One sprang up addressing Judge Trent, "Your Honor, our client is emotionally unstable." But the judge didn't respond. He sat still, holding the gavel loosely, watching the man kneel in front of him. He didn't need to strike it. The courtroom was already silent. Diddy continued, "I know I've caused pain. I know I once believed power could protect me from consequences. But I forgot that truth doesn't wait. The statement wasn't performative. It wasn't even a pure confession. It was exhaustion of a man who had held secrets too long and no longer had the strength to carry them. Some in the room thought it was courtroom theatrics, a final attempt to sway the jury, but those who had worked with him long enough knew this was the first time Diddy had lost control, and for him, that was unforgivable. A former staffer seated behind the press gallery whispered to the New York Times, "I once saw him make an assistant cry over a typo in an email. But today I saw a man shaking, not because of a verdict, but because he finally realized he wasn't in charge anymore. And perhaps that more than any recording or sworn statement was what broke him. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't force anyone. But I stayed silent." He kept speaking uninterrupted. "I didn't kill. I didn't beat. I didn't force anyone to do anything they didn't want to. But I created an environment where silence became policy, where if you wanted to be invited back, you knew the rules, and if not, you disappeared." He didn't deny the contents of the dossier. He didn't challenge the private risk index. He didn't refute the illicit payouts. Instead, he said, "I never thought it was wrong until the one person who protected me the most became the one who brought the truth to light." Pam, if you're listening, I understand why you did it. I thank you. The courtroom didn't applaud. No one moved. But the air, according to one journalist, was heavier than any verdict ever read. Immediately afterward, Diddy's lead defense attorney, Matthew Leroy, tried to regain control. "We request this be excluded from the record. My client did not speak under oath. This is not a legal admission." But Judge Trent stared back sharp and still. "Mr. Leroy," he said, "not all confessions need to be in the record. Some once said in this air need no lawyer to validate them." As live news cameras streamed, Diddy bowing his head, hands over his face, the world reacted. Diddy just collapsed. He admitted it. Pam did it. The hashtag No More Silence hit #1, trending within 30 minutes. Dozens of former assistants, collaborators, and insiders began sharing quiet tributes to Pam Bondee. Celebrities previously silent spoke up. Kerry Washington, "Listen. Don't judge, but don't pretend you didn't see." Trevor Noah. "That wasn't a performance. That was what happens when truth runs out of places to hide." Questlove Power was never meant to silence others. Some said Diddy knelt out of fear, out of collapse, because there was no escape. But no matter the motive, the kneeling like Will Smith's slap or Monica Lewinsky's lifted chin became a symbol far beyond the man who enacted it. It marked the end of an era where artists were excused from morality because they created hits. It marked the beginning of a moment where a single belated truth could still shake an empire. Judge Harrison Trent had not yet issued a sentence. The trial would continue for days, maybe weeks. But to the public, the verdict was already rendered not through testimony, but through eyes and silence. And for Diddy, regardless of whether he escaped criminal punishment, the date June 6, 2025 was now etched into cultural history. He didn't kneel to the law. He knelt to the truth. At some point in American legal history, there are cases where the verdict is not only for the accused, but for the entire culture. The trial of Sean Diddy Combs, technically a civil case on mismanagement and evidence suppression, had gone far beyond legal scope. It became a mirror held up to the inner workings of the American entertainment industry over the past 3 decades. A stage lit with glamour while the backstage remained a graveyard of untold injuries. The dossier presented by Pam Bondee wasn't just evidence of wrongdoing. It was a schematic, a live diagram of a system designed to control information, emotion, and opportunity. From tiered guest lists and reputation management playbooks to loyalty payouts for public defenders, every piece operated like a political machine. Or worse, an intelligence agency. In an industry that supposedly champions art and freedom, truth was being managed, financed, and enforced with the silent consent of hundreds of insiders. And that's the terrifying part. No one built this alone. No music mogul could run a kingdom of complicity without media silence, celebrity complicity lawyers enabling it, hotel staff switching off cameras, and consumers streaming songs without asking questions. Throughout the trial, the phrase most whispered was not evidence, victim, or testimony. It was everyone knew. They knew about the secret parties. They knew about the guest hierarchy. They knew about NDAs, so thick speaking a sentence could become a lawsuit. And they chose silence not always out of support, but because that's how the industry works. But perhaps what strikes the deepest chord is that it wasn't a whistleblower from the outside who exposed it. It was Pam Bondee, an insider. A woman who helped run the machine until her conscience wouldn't let her anymore. What made the Diddy collapse so seismic was not just his fame. It was what he symbolized. He wasn't just an artist. He was the embodiment of Black American success. He spoke at Howard University. He sponsored scholarships for minority students. He funded community development initiatives, which is exactly why this fall felt like a communal wound. A student tweeted, "I used to see myself in Diddy. Now I understand. Without ethics, even your legacy is built on sand." And the bitter truth, Diddy is not an outlier. He was simply the first to be dragged awake by the sound of the truth. After the trial, media companies began issuing public statements. Spotify and Apple Music reduced algorithmic visibility for Diddy's tracks. Bet pulled all his content from recommended lists. A film studio under contract with Revolt TV announced an indefinite freeze on their joint project. But is that enough? One anonymous executive told Rolling Stone no, because this didn't start with a song. It started with an industry willing to overlook every warning sign in the name of profit. And now that same industry is being forced to rewind its playlist one line at a time to figure out where the lyrics went wrong. In the days after the trial, former staffers, stylists, tech managers began publicly apologizing to victims they once called attention-seeking or delusional. One wrote, "I didn't believe them. Not because they weren't believable, but because I didn't want to believe. Because if they were right, it meant I'd been standing next to the wrong side for years." These apologies don't change the past, but they acknowledge one thing. Once the truth is out, no one can hide behind, "I didn't know anymore." Prosecutor Emily Johnson said during closing remarks, "This isn't a trial about one man. This is a trial about how an entire system learned to survive by feeding on the silence of others. Federal court can't prosecute all of Hollywood. It can't convict every audience member who cheered not knowing what was happening backstage. But justice isn't just hammers and statutes. Sometimes it's about a society waking up. The trial may continue for weeks. Diddy may be convicted or not. He may face fines or criminal charges in another court. But the most important thing has already happened. The system he stood for has been exposed. The question is no longer, is he guilty? It is how many others knew and stayed silent. And if we don't change the way we look, listen, and speak, then the next trial might not call Diddy's name. It might call ours.